Is Life Coach Friday. That means that Annette Walters from Real Women joins me, as we do every other Friday, and talk about ways to create the life that you want, to find community, to find connection, to sometimes talk about my personal problems. Because Annette's
just speaking in another session, I know.
Exactly. Annette also is my life coach. So I love doing Life Coach Friday because it gets me more time with her.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I appreciate this. And as always, it's just the same for me. I'm so excited to just spend more time with you.
It's always fun. We always have fun. And today,
we'll record our other prep sessions someday.
We'll do a behind the scenes reel. I love that today we're talking about mind reading. How do you really know what people are thinking? Have you ever thought you knew, maybe it's your partner and you're like, you know what? I know what he or she is thinking. Absolutely. They're definitely upset with me. And it turns out they're not when you ask about it. Why are you upset with me? Or why are you upset with me? And maybe they go, what are you talking about? Or the opposite, you think they're super happy and they're not. There's just a mystery. We hear about this a lot. How do you know what somebody is really thinking?
Mm-hmm. That is one of those things that gets so many of us into trouble, is because we do miss the mark. But the funny thing about it is that, especially with people that we truly know, or we're in a situation, even in a business situation where we've gone through cycles before, where we've walked a path, we get pretty good at predicting what people are thinking, but it's never actually 100%. And that is what we're talking about today, is that we're talking about mind reading and how as humans that we use it in part for self-preservation. I mean, we do it from a safety standpoint. I mean, we need to predict that there aren't, tigers around the corner that are going to consume us, or, maybe even on the highway that people are going to stay in their own lanes. We make these assumptions as part of how we live our daily lives. But when it comes to mind reading and thinking that we know what the other person is thinking, we need to always come at it carefully. Because even though we can be very good predictors, sometimes we can be off. And so we're going to talk about it today. And so hopefully by the end of this episode, you're going to be really good at figuring out what other people are actually thinking. So
I'm excited. I'm excited because I feel like I really do not do that well. So much so that I pretty much just try to never assume that I know what somebody is thinking.
But you know what? I counter that, because back to my example of even driving down the road, mm-hmm. You're constantly assuming that they're going to stay in their lane. Mm-hmm. And that's how, we have these, it's the way that our brains are set up. We've talked about it before, but we've got two parts of our brain, and one of them is the habitual side. And frankly, about 95% of our lives run on that side. And so it depends on this knowledge that we can tap into time and time again. Because when it goes to consuming or bringing in new information, it takes a lot of energy for the brain to do it. And so even when, we don't want to bring in new things, it's one of those things that that we need to move forward with care when we're predicting or assuming, because what they taught us about assuming back in grade school.
That's right. Mm-hmm. It makes an ASS of you and me.
Exactly. So, what have you experienced with mind reading out with other people?
With me, I feel that I have maybe, and maybe some of you can relate. I hope you can. By the way, post your comments, post your thoughts. Post your questions. We want to hear from you. This is an interactive Life Coach Friday. So join us. Comment. We want to know that you're watching. We want to hear what your thoughts are. For me, where my struggle is I'm not the best at reading people. If someone is using, I'm a very literal person. You know, my background is a writer. I've written for years. I've written different columns in the area. And so I'm very big on words. So when someone is using certain words to describe how they're feeling or what's happening, I believe them. And if their body language is different, I struggle with that. I don't read that body language really well if they're saying one thing, but they're really thinking another. You know, for example, this would happen with my kids. I'd be like, hey, you know, how's it, you know, everything okay? How things going? How's school? And one of my daughters would be like, you know, oh, you know, it's fine. So I'd be like, oh, okay. And then later on, she'd say, you know, it's just sometimes it's like, you know, I wish you would ask me about things. I'm like, well, what things? I asked you how it was. You said it was fine. She goes, but it wasn't fine. I'm like, okay, how am I supposed to know that? And I realized that there's some people, you know, just communicate more with their body language or don't say exactly what they think. And that is where my struggle is.
Yes, that is so true. And quick shout out to Amy too. Thanks for joining us, dear. Appreciate it. Always good to see you too. You know, that is the struggle. And as I have moved all around the country and all around the world, my background, for those who don't know, is that I've relocated 15 times. And one of the biggest challenges is understanding what things mean in different parts of the country. Now, Natalie and like I did not grow up where we live now. And so when our kids learn different things by being around their peers and then they bring it home, we don't necessarily recognize it like the fine thing. When I lived in Minnesota, that was very common. It was like the acceptable thing to say. But it's not actually what's going on, and it does require an extra question, or, you know, almost like, are you sure, type of a thing without saying that. So, you know, but this gets back to words and actions in that, you know, a lot of things when people say things are not necessarily what they're actually thinking or wanting. And if you pause long enough to see the actions and the results that they create, that really goes a lot further to understanding what they're thinking in the first place. Because all of our thinking all of our results come from what we think, whether we tell other people about it or not. It's like fingerprints all over our lives. And so, you know, when the kids come home and they say they're fine, and then you get a report card that says, "Woo, not so fine," you know,
Yeah.
those are the fingerprints that we then can see. Hmm.
So how, you know, what would you recommend then? Because in for example, and so what I've learned to do is just to be a little bit more persistent. And actually, one of the things that I do with people, I do this with my family, friends, when I make new friends, and I even do it with my clients. I let them know, you know, in the beginning of our relationship as we're working together, and I'm in real estate, I'll say, you know, I'm very literal, and so, you know, it's completely okay if you don't like a place, if you love a place, but you know, let me know. Don't back off. Feel free to let me know, because if you tell me you kind of like it, but inside you don't, I'm not going to know. Even if you kind of give me a look that you think communicates that. So I've tried to just be more communicative myself in sharing that. And that's worked fairly well. What ends up happening usually is there has to be a minor incident or example where there's some cross wires. And then I'll go, oh, okay. So are you saying, so I'll confirm. I'll say, my understanding of what you mean is this. Is this what we're looking for? and I'll repeat it back to them, and then they'll go, oh yeah, or no, actually it's this. And I found that helpful to, to clarify and not assume that I know what it is they want or what it is they think about a particular property. And it was the same with my kids. I had to, and still today, now my kids are adults, and sometimes they want to host get-togethers at their homes. And I'm a homebody. I like staying close to where I live, and my kids live a little ways, 30, 40 minutes away, not that much. And, sometimes I'll be like, no, I don't want to drive out there. And I miss that. What they're really saying is, hey, I want to have you over. I want to make this special evening, or I want to host this holiday. It's really important to me. But because they didn't say that, I wasn't getting it. So I guess they were assuming that I knew what they meant as well. Oh, I never thought about it like that.
Oops. Yeah, and that's one of the things that happens, and that within those assumptions, what we're doing is that we're almost like sidestepping or going faster than the conversation is actually going. So we assume that people understand, and so we jump a couple of paces down the street, whereas we're still back here, and we have to talk about that. But it's when we go faster that we start to make those mistakes. Because if they paused long enough to understand where you were coming from, that you are a homebody, so you're gonna need a reason some days in order to kind of shore up that energy to be able to go and be present and part of the group. It's the same thing that we have to do for other people, especially those of us who are fixers. We like to get in with a good puzzle and solve it. But sometimes when we start to solve for other people, they're like, well, that's what? It's almost like we've started speaking Latin, or some other dead language that nobody actually speaks anymore. And so we go into it, and we think we're being so clear. We think, like your kids, they think that they're being so generous and accommodating, by inviting you. Maybe you don't have to cook dinner for yourself, or or make these arrangements to see the family, or whatever it is. But it's lost because they have jumped to the end without going all the way through the middle. And most of us need, even those of us who, are very observant of the world, we need to still slow down, create space so that we can see everything and walk each individual piece. Amy Jacobs had a comment before about, she had this, I'm going to read it off really quick because she's got it in the side comments here. She back to your example of, the kids coming home from school and what to do, especially when they won't talk. So it's like, parent, hi, how are you? How's life? What you been doing? Child goes, I'm fine. Life's good. Back, and, so she goes back to what she was doing. And then the child quits asking so many questions, almost like they kind of shut down or take get protective, I guess. With even the parent asking a question. So
yeah, sometimes it's like it's when my kids were teenagers, I got a lot of the pushback. I'm fine,
Yeah, I can tell.
And even I was like, okay, well, and in my head I go, well, I'm hearing that she's fine. It did seem a little loud, and because I'm so literal, and I'm looking at her going, she must be fine.
Or she's handling it. Maybe she does have something, but I guess she's handling it.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things you learn when you get a life coach is that you learn a lot about safe spaces, which is a place where, and this is what I hear from my clients time and time again. I mean, they will tell me lots and lots of different things that maybe they wouldn't share with their closest people or friends. And it's because of the safe space. when you come into life coaching, especially the flavor that I do, it's one of those things where there's no judgment. There's literally no judgment. The decision is always yours. And when we can take some of those lessons and then move them on to like conversations with our kids, so that they have the opportunity of solving their own issues, that helps to start create a safe space. I was talking to my mom a couple of weeks ago, and there was something going on here, and she started to jump in to solve. Now, I'm an empty nester, so I've been doing this for quite a while. And she jumps in to solve. And I was talking to her on the phone, and I said, Mom, I really appreciate that, and that's good information. However, sometimes I just like to solve my own puzzles. And you know what? She is always there for me. She and my dad are people that I can count on any day of the week. I mean, anytime. And that's been that way my whole life. But, they've raised me in such a way that I realized, we like to solve our own issues. And sometimes that's what we need to create, is just that safe space for our kids to realize, yes, I trust you to be able to solve this. And if you want, some help, I'm here. And so I think, that part of getting kids back to talking is trying to work without judgment to create that safe space where they can just talk.
Do you think, sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Do you think that, because I also, on a personal level, I mean, and more than anyone, I don't have a lot of boundaries in terms of what I'm willing to communicate about or what I'm willing to share about. I'm a chronic oversharer. Anyone who follows me on social media knows that. I've spent 10 years, as a writer, writing columns, and a lot of it been about, me doing things around town. And when you talk about creating a safe space, do you think that sometimes, whether it's our, family, kids, our partners, aren't telling us exactly what they're thinking because there's a feeling of, maybe it's just a fear of judgment? So, and if I'm hearing you correctly, if we can create a safe space without judgment, that then those individuals in our life who are important to us will start to feel more comfortable. They'll feel that safe space. And that's how I feel, with you when we do our coaching sessions. I know that I can say anything and there's no judgment there. We are there for a reason, and it's to be helpful. So is that kind of what you're saying, that if we could create that safe space of without judgment and listening from a point of curiosity, that the other person is more likely to tell us exactly what they're thinking?
Yes, exactly. Because that judgment is actually a protective self-serving. And if you really, really think of the judgments that we make in our lives, it doesn't actually get us anyplace. And much of the judgment actually leaves us feeling pretty crappy. And so what I'd like to offer up as an alternative to judgment is just simple analysis, like data analysis. So like when your kid is talking to you and they're telling you things, that you were maybe hoping that they didn't do because you can see about 10 steps ahead. But you look at it as data and almost treat it like, okay, so that's a thing now. Now what? Now, how do I connect the dots to help them understand what the implications might be? Actually gets us down the road, and it gets us to that place of curiosity so that we can actually engage and see them, we can see us, and we can see those 10 steps down the road and then put the puzzle pieces together. If we sit in judgment and how could you do this? How did I raise you like that you would think that this is okay or that you would be safe? I mean, we've turned that focus inward, and we're not actually going anyplace except for beating the crap out of ourselves or out of other people. It doesn't create the future or the present even that we want in this particular situation. And so if we shift that to analysis and curiosity, it does create that place where you're like, okay, so how did you get there? When did you start thinking about this? That's the place where you can really come all the way full circle. Because until we can identify those connecting points, we can't help them see anything different, at least in the case of, our kids who we have some influence over.
That makes so much sense. And I did this with my kids, and it was an aunt of mine who was very involved in raising my sister and I. And when we were teenagers, she came up with this, and this was the rule in our household. She said, if there's something that you did that we need to know about, we need to deal with, we need to handle, and you want to tell me without me blowing up, just preface it with, there's something I need to tell you. And then, I'm going to take a moment, and I'm going to get present and listen to you, and not from a place of freaking out. Now, it doesn't mean it will be without consequence, but to create, what I'm realizing now is she was creating that safe space. And so then when I had kids and they got to be in those teenage years, that is a tool that I used, and it worked really well. And now I'm understanding more why it worked, because I would say, okay, if there's something we need to talk about, and you don't want me to freak out, because I know sometimes I do, just say there's something I need to tell you. And that'll be the cue that I know, okay, I'm going to get present, and I'm going to listen to you from a place of curiosity and without judgment. Doesn't mean there'll be no consequences for your actions. Right. And the cool thing about that is, as a parent, it really helped me stay calm and not have as much stress about whatever it was they were telling me. And back then, because, my oldest is 30 now, so it's been a hot minute since I've been parenting teenagers. And now I get it. It makes so much more sense to me. It was creating a safe space for them to go, okay. And then they would tell me what it was. And it wasn't always easy. But when I had that second to go, okay, they're going to tell me something. And when I did, and I kept it together, and I let them talk, and I asked questions in a calm way, and we worked through it, 9 out of 10 times, we both felt really good about it, and we actually ended up at a resolution. Rather than that fighting, how stupid could you be to do that? I've told you so many times. That was removed from the equation. But I needed that cue to know something was coming. I just needed a little bit of a warning. So I can see that being a really good tool. But now, with what you're saying, it makes so much more sense to me why it did work. I just thought it was magic.
And it was in a lot of ways, because, it's like that line had a set of rules associated with it. So, anybody can say this, and now these are the rules that we're going to adhere to, and we've already got pre-agreement for that. So what were the rules that your aunt said about this? So you say that, but what are the rules?
The rules were that in the moment of why we were discussing it, she wasn't going to get mad and yell and scream and freak out and be reactionary about it. She was actually going to listen, and we were going to talk about it. And it made it so much easier, because often, kids, adults, wherever we're at in life, we make mistakes. Sometimes we make choices that aren't the best choices, but we do it anyways. And it helped me be a big believer in, it's not about the mistake. It's about how you handle it now. It's about how you deal with it, how you take responsibility and work out of that hole. So she always gave us an opportunity, and I pass this on with my kids. I tried to do this too. Always gave us, and I tried to give my children an opportunity to make it right. It wasn't just, you did this, your life is over, you were grounded till the end of time. That helps no one. And if you can get a kid to come to you and even be willing to talk about what happened and what they did, and they know that you're going to help them resolve it, doesn't mean there won't be consequence. And we talked about this ahead of time. My aunt did with us. We established the rules, and I did that with my children too, ahead of time. This is why we're going to do this way. So I would say those are what the rules were.
And so I'm going to take a sidestep here into a little coaching and tools. So all of you that are listening, this is part of what I teach my clients. And so these rules that Natalie's talking about are actually statements in our heads, or statements in her head and in her aunt's head, that they chose to think when these issues came up. They chose to think things like, okay, I'm going to hear something hard and I'm not going to get mad. I am going to be present and listen so that I can completely understand what's going on. When you think things like these actively, especially when you're starting to get information from people that you don't want, or in other knee-jerk situations where you would get super mad or have an explosive reaction like that, it redirects your brain out of that habitual, or that 95% brain that I was talking about before, into that 5%, so that we can actually make active decisions in the moment based on what's going on and who's there. And that allows us to really connect. So one of the things I'd also like to point out is that because of those rules, and because, like what you said at the end, many times you felt, both you and your aunt or you and your kids felt good about what had transpired, not the circumstance or the situation, but the fact that y'all had walked through it, it actually strengthened your connections between you, which proved and created proof that this system and these rules work. And so, it really ended up being kind of a flywheel into this safe space to create that place where people are willing to say what was really on their mind, so that everybody knew what they were thinking.
And I think too, and I'm very curious, I'm actually going to talk to my daughter about this today. My middle child was the more challenging one as a teenager, and she'll be the first one to admit that. And when we were doing this and trying to communicate this way, she was more open to sharing things with me. And it not just kept me calm, it kept her calm. But what I started to notice was, as we did this, that there were less things that she was doing that were, a violation of our household rules. There were still things, but it started to be more when she could talk about it and share that she did that. And I didn't freak out about it. Again, didn't mean there wasn't a consequence to it, but it's one that we discussed and she agreed to. So it really put her in the driver's seat, and she was less likely to make those same mistakes or make those choices that weren't the best for her. I noticed, whereas when she would make a choice that wasn't the best for her or our family, and I would freak out, she almost always did it again.
That's a lesson for all of us. And I've seen that as well.
Yeah, but when it wasn't a thing, and not a thing in terms of consequence, there was always a consequence, but that usually involved her having an opportunity to make it right. Then and I'm not sure the mechanics behind that, but she didn't seem to be as prone to repeat those same mistakes. It's like maybe it's that, rebellious, because there was nothing to rebel against, because she was able to tell me what happened and we were able to talk about it and go, okay, well, what are your thoughts? And that's the other thing, is I started asking her, well, what do you think about that? Because for, me as a parent early on, it was all about more just what I thought about. And I wish I'd have gotten better at that when they were younger. And more, hindsight being 2020, today at 51, I think very differently than I did when I was a parent back then. And I guess that's just how it goes. But I would have definitely employed this tool more, because when I did, it really made a difference. I like what Amy said too. Ask them to tell you more and listen. They may not always be looking for an answer. That is another one that took me. I still struggle with that because I'm very literal. So if you're coming with, hey, I'm trying to figure out how to blah, blah, blah. I go right into fix it mode. Well, you could da, 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 da. And they're like, no, I'm trying to tell you. And I'm like, So what I've done, because I am not a good mind reader, is I would say, oh, okay, do you want me to make suggestions or just tell me? And then they just go, oh, yeah, I just want to tell you, I just want you to listen. I just want to vent. Then I go, oh, okay. Because venting too was a struggle. People would vent to me and I was convinced that they were going to do whatever the actions were they were saying, because again, literal. So if you say, I'm just going to kill that person, I'd be like, oh my gosh. I mean, not really. I mean, you know that, they're like, I wouldn't do that. I'm just saying that. So when it comes to mind reading, I am on the opposite spectrum of being able to do it at all.
Yeah, and that's the thing about mind reading is that, as humans, we are pretty good predictors of, past equals future behavior. But because we have this thing called a prefrontal cortex, anything is possible, which means that at any given time, even though that we know people who have gone through cycles and cycles before and repeated patterns, it doesn't mean that the next time they're going to do it the exact same way, or they haven't had a personal revelation, which comes from that space and open discussion, that it now something new makes sense, which shifts how they think and what they believe.
Oh, that makes so much sense. That is such a great tool. If you tuned in partway through, go ahead and rewatch this because there's some great gems in it from Annette. We got to wrap up now. I always feel like we never have enough time. But I'm going to run out and meet my sister's new baby.
Yes.
Yes. So we're going to do Life Coach Friday again, not next Friday, but the Friday afterwards. And again, you can find Annette at realwomen.com. If you go to any page on her website, she's got this Let's Chat button where you can click on it and you can schedule an hour with her complimentary to see what life coaching is about, what it's like. I encourage you to do it. I've been working with her for about a year and it's helped me tremendously, not just personally and in the changes I've gone through with moving, relocating myself, changing jobs, all kinds of things. I found it super helpful. So join us again in another week and a half, right? You got anything else to add, Annette, before we wrap up?
Natalie, thank you so much. And if you are ever looking for an amazing and effective communicator as a real estate agent in the Lake Minnetonka area, make sure that you call Natalie Webster because I've been a real estate agent and God bless her. She is amazing at this. She details and she can walk through any emotional situation that you throw at her. So, and she knows the market.
Yes, but you don't have to throw those emotional situations at me. Don't feel like you need to test it out. But I appreciate that. And I thank you. Everybody else have an absolutely fabulous weekend. And thank you for joining us.